Ever catch yourself wondering, like, hold on, is that even legal? Get ready, because today we're diving into the world of legal exceptions, where things aren't always what they seem,
We're talking about those times when something looks like a crime.
but it might actually be okay.
Exactly.
We're tackling general exceptions in the law,
Buckle up.
because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
We're taking a journey through Chapter 3 of, well, let's just call it a fascinating legal document.
It lays out all these scenarios where breaking the rules might not land you in trouble.
You ready for some real head-scratchers?
I am. Let's jump right in with Section 14, Bound by Law.
Okay, so this section, it's not as simple as just following orders.
It's not.
No, it gets into the difference between blindly obeying and genuinely believing you're legally obligated to act.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. So let's say a police officer arrests someone
Right.
based on a court order,
Yeah.
but it turns out to be the wrong person.
Uh,
Are they off the hook just because the court told them to do it?
Well, not necessarily. Even with a court order, the officer has to genuinely believe that, they are legally bound to make that arrest.
So they can't just blindly follow any order that comes their way.
Exactly. There has to be a real belief that the law requires them to act that way. Like, imagine they did a due inquiry.
What was that?
Due inquiry, basically meaning they did their homework,
They check things out.
Yeah, and still believed it was the right person.
So that good faith belief, that's key.
It's crucial, yeah.
It makes you think about those historical just following orders arguments.
You're right.
How does the law actually tell the difference between legitimate obedience and just trying to avoid taking responsibility?
That is a question that's challenged legal systems for centuries.
I bet.
Section 14, it really tries to get at the heart of intent.
The intent of the person following the order.
Did you knowingly break the law, or did you honestly believe you were doing what was legally required?
That's a big difference.
Huge.
So it's not like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No.
Just because someone in authority told you to do something,
Nope.
it boils down to your understanding of the law.
And whether you truly believed you were acting within its bounds.
That's really interesting. Okay, now let's shift gears to judges, because they make tough calls all the time.
All the time.
People might disagree with their decisions.
Yeah.
So does Section 15 give them, like, free reign to do whatever they want on the bench?
Not exactly. This section is about judicial immunity.
Okay.
It protects judges from legal action for their rulings.
Oh, so they can't get sued for every decision they make.
Right. But there are some caveats.
There's always caveats.
They have to be acting in their official capacity as a judge and doing so in good faith.
So it's not a license to abuse their power.
No, not at all.
This protection is important, though, right?
Absolutely. We need judges to be impartial.
Right. We need them to make decisions without fear of, being sued every time someone disagrees.
That's the idea.
But what about those cases where a judge might act with, like, malice or a clear intent to harm? Is there any limit to this immunity?
That's a great question.
Something I've always wondered about.
Yeah, legal scholars are always grappling with how to balance protecting judicial independence while ensuring accountability.
It's a tricky balance, for sure.
Very delicate.
Okay, so Section 16, this one seems pretty intense.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if you act on a court order that turns out to be invalid?
This is where these exceptions can get really complicated.
I bet.
Because even if a court oversteps its boundaries,
Issues an order it had no right to give.
Right. Even then, acting on that order might not be a crime.
Wait, really?
The crucial thing here, once again, is good faith.
So you're saying you could be told to do something by a court
Uh-huh.
that has no authority to tell you to do that thing,
Yeah,
and you'd still be in the clear?
potentially.
Yeah.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It really emphasizes why knowing your legal rights.
And the powers of different courts.
Yes, it's so important.
Oh.
You can't just exploit a flawed order.
No, you have to truly believe that the court has the authority it claims to have.
Makes sense. If something feels off, that's when you talk to a lawyer.
Absolutely.
Okay, all this legal talk is making me want to brush up on my law knowledge.
It's fascinating stuff.
Let's move on to something a bit more action-packed now.
All right, what do you have in mind?
Self-defense.
Oh, yeah.
Section 17 gets into some intense scenarios.
Like what?
Like, imagine you're witnessing what you think is a murder,
Oh, wow.
and you jump in to stop it.
Okay.
But it turns out the person you thought was the victim was actually the aggressor.
Yikes.
Are you in trouble for intervening?
That is a tough spot to be in.
What does the law say about those split-second decisions?
That's where the idea of reasonable belief comes in.
Reasonable belief.
The law gets that you can't be expected to have all the facts in a high-pressure situation.
Right. You just have to react.
It asks, would a reasonable person in your shoes, with the information they had at the time, have acted the same way?
So it's not about being right or wrong in hindsight.
Nope.
It's about whether your actions were reasonable.
Based on what you knew at the time.
That seems fair.
The law takes context into account.
But it's not a free pass to just act recklessly, right?
Right. It emphasizes that you can't use excessive force.
So there's a balance there.
Always.
This is really showing me how much nuance there is in the law. Like, it's not about finding loopholes.
It's about understanding the context.
And the intent behind actions.
Exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears again.
Lead the way.
Let's talk about accidents because, they happen.
They do.
Section 18, this is where we get into those unexpected mishaps.
The ones with unintended consequences.
Yeah, like that example in our source about the hatchet head
Oh, yeah.
flying off while someone's chopping wood
Uh-huh.
and tragically hitting someone nearby.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It makes you realize that accidents, even though they're awful,
They're not always crying.
right, but the actions leading up to the accident,
Yeah.
those have to be lawful.
Done in a lawful way with care and caution.
So if you're doing something legal and responsibly, but something goes wrong,
It doesn't automatically mean you're at fault.
that's reassuring.
But it also raises the question, what if there was negligence involved?
Oh, that's a good point.
Where's the line between a true accident and recklessness?
That's where things get tricky, right?
That's when those specific details of each case, they become super important.
Right, like investigators would want to know if you took reasonable precautions.
Exactly, and if there were any risks you ignored.
Okay, so accidents are complex,
Yeah,
and the law recognizes that.
absolutely.
Okay, now let's get into even murkier waters.
Murky waters, all right, I'm ready.
This is section 19, where we explore this idea of causing harm to prevent greater harm.
This is where we get into those tough ethical and legal dilemmas.
It's about those choices between two bad options.
Right. What if you have to cause some harm?
To prevent something even worse from happening.
Exactly.
That ship captain example really brings this to life. Having to decide whether to potentially run down a smaller boat with 2 passengers.
To avoid hitting a much larger boat with 30.
That's a no-win situation.
It really is.
It makes you think about those tough choices people have to make.
Sometimes.
And how the law has to try and make sense of it all.
Well, and it emphasizes that the harm you cause has to be proportionate to the harm you're trying to prevent.
So you can't just go around hurting people
No.
just because you think it serves a greater purpose.
There has to be a real threat.
And your actions have to be a genuine attempt to stop that threat.
Without any criminal intent, the source is very clear on that.
It makes you think about all those debates we see, in current events and stuff.
And what do you mean?
About whether it's ever okay to break the law for the greater good.
Those questions come up all the time.
Section 19, it kind of gives us a legal framework for understanding these complex situations.
It shows how the law reflects our values as a society.
And how it's constantly changing as we figure out these tough ethical and philosophical questions.
Yeah, it's always evolving.
This is fascinating. We've talked about accidents, self-defense, judges. It's like a legal roller coaster.
What a ride.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, there's always more.
What about when kids break the law?
That's a whole other area.
How does the legal system handle those cases?
Well, sections 20 and 21 get into that.
Okay.
They deal with the age of criminal responsibility.
That sense.
Section 20 is pretty straightforward.
Okay, what does it say?
It says children under 7 years old can't commit an offense.
No matter what they do.
No matter what.
So a 6-year-old could, I don't know,
Yeah.
do something pretty bad,
Uh-huh.
and they still wouldn't be held responsible.
Not criminally, no.
Wow. The law recognizes they might not understand the consequences of their actions.
Right. Their brains are still developing.
What about older kids, though, like between 7 and 12?
That's where section 21 comes in.
Okay.
For that age range, it comes down to their maturity of understanding.
So can they actually judge the consequences of their actions?
Do they get the difference between right and wrong?
In a legal sense,
Yeah.
that seems really hard to figure out.
It can be. It often involves psychologists and other experts.
To assess the child's understanding,
Right.
it raises a bigger question,
It's that.
about how we balance protecting children
Uh-huh.
while still holding them accountable for what they do.
That's tough balance.
Especially as we learn more about how kids develop.
Exactly.
The law is always trying to keep up.
And reflect those changes.
This is really eye-opening. Like, it's not just about rigid rules
It's about reflecting the complexities of being human.
and how our understanding of ourselves is always changing.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay, 2 more sections for this part of our deep dive.
All right, bring it on.
These focus on mental state
Okay.
and how it plays into legal responsibility.
This is getting deep.
Sections 22 and 23. They deal with unsoundness of mind and involuntary intoxication.
Okay, those are some big concepts.
They are. Let's start with unsoundness of mind. If someone is considered of unsound mind, does that automatically excuse them from being held responsible for a crime?
It's not automatic, no.
So there are conditions.
The key is whether the person, because of their mental state at the time of the offense, was incapable of understanding what they were doing.
Or understanding that it was wrong.
Right. It's not enough to just have a mental illness. It has to seriously impair their understanding of their actions.
So there's a high bar to clear for this exception to apply.
It's not a blanket excuse for anyone with a mental health condition.
That makes sense. The defense would have to prove that the person's mental state really prevented them from understanding what they were doing.
And the consequences of their actions.
Okay, what about intoxication?
All right.
Does being drunk or high get you off the hook?
Well, Section 23 is specific about this.
Okay, what does it say?
Intoxication is only a defense if it was involuntary.
So someone had to slip something into your drink.
Or force you to consume drugs or alcohol.
So you can't just say, I was too drunk to know what I was doing.
And expect to avoid responsibility.
Right, because you made the choice to drink.
Exactly.
But what about those cases where someone claims they blacked out?
And don't remember what happened.
Yeah. Does that count as involuntary intoxication?
That's where things get a little more complicated. I bet. Voluntary intoxication, even to the point of blacking out, doesn't automatically mean you're not responsible.
So even if you don't remember, you still made the choice to drink.
And you're accountable for the consequences.
But what if, like, someone unknowingly drank something way stronger than they thought?
Or they have a medical condition that makes them react badly to alcohol.
Those are good points.
Those are the nuances that can change things.
So it really depends on the situation.
And all the facts of the case.
Which is why it's always good to have a lawyer.
Always a good idea.
Wow, this deep dive is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about the law.
It's more than just rules.
It's like, it's trying to keep up with how complicated human behavior is.
All the gray areas.
That's a lot to think about.
It
We've covered so much. Accidents, self-defense, the impact of age and mental state.
It's been a whirlwind.
It's clear that the law is way more nuanced than just a list of do's and don'ts.
It's about recognizing that there are often valid reasons why someone might break the rules.
And the law has to consider those reasons.
It's about looking deeper, considering intent.
And acknowledging that sometimes there are justified exceptions.
Exactly. It's not always about punishing wrongdoers.
It's about ensuring fairness.
And taking into account all the complexities of being human.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing the law in a whole new light.
That's what we like to hear.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive into these general exceptions.
Stay tuned, there's more to come.
Welcome back to our deep dive into general exceptions.
Where we're exploring those times when breaking the rules might not be a crime.
These exceptions are fascinating, right?
They show how the law tries to balance justice with,
Yeah.
understanding how complex people can be.
It's not always clear-cut.
Nope.
We've been looking closely at Chapter 3 of this legal document.
Uncovering all these interesting situations.
I'm still thinking about that ship captain example from Section 19.
Ooh, yeah.
Where they have to decide whether to potentially run down a smaller boat
With 2 passengers.
to avoid hitting a bigger boat with 30.
It really makes you think.
Talk about a tough choice.
It shows how sometimes causing harm
Right.
can actually be legally the right thing to do.
But there are those strict conditions, right?
Absolutely, like acting in good faith.
And without any criminal intention.
The captain can't just decide they want to save those 2 passengers and ram the bigger boat on purpose.
Right. It's not about personal preference.
The law gets that.
It separates a calculated act of harm.
From, like, a split-second decision made to minimize the overall harm.
That makes sense. But it's not just about what the captain believes in that moment,
That's a
right?
good point.
Our source makes it clear.
It says it's a question of fact
And whether the danger was imminent enough.
to justify that action.
So a reasonable person would have to feel that same urgency.
Yeah, we can't expect absolute certainty in those high-pressure moments.
But the captain's belief has to be reasonable.
Given what's happening around them,
It really makes you think about those ripple effects.
of our actions,
How even choices made with good intentions
can have consequences we didn't expect.
Like, what if you see someone about to get hit by a car and you push them out of the way?
Okay.
But they break their arm when you push them.
You've caused harm.
But you did it to prevent something worse.
Section 19 could definitely come into play there.
That's a really interesting example of this deep dive. It's making me realize that the law,
It's not just a set of fixed rules, you know?
it's like it's trying to keep up with how unpredictable we are.
It's an ongoing conversation about right and wrong,
About fairness and protecting people's rights.
while keeping society in order.
And as we've seen with these general exceptions,
That conversation often leads to more questions than answers.
it definitely gets you thinking, okay, we've covered a lot. But there's one more section I want to talk about.
Okay, which one?
Section 23. It deals with involuntary intoxication.
This one always gets people talking.
Because we tend to think of intoxication as reckless, right?
Like you're responsible for your actions.
But the key here
Is that word involuntary?
so if someone spikes your drink
Or forces you to drink.
and you commit an act that would normally be a crime,
You might have a defense.
it's almost like,
You're temporarily not in control.
that's a good way to put it. The law sees that your actions,
Are really your own free will.
you couldn't make a clear choice.
Right. It's similar to like unsoundness of mind.
But what about those cases where someone claims they were so drunk?
They blacked out.
Yeah, and don't remember what happened?
Would that fall under involuntary intoxication?
That's a tough one.
It can get a bit tricky, you know?
Yeah.
The law usually says that voluntary intoxication
Even if you black out,
doesn't automatically get rid of your responsibility.
so even if you don't remember, you still chose to drink.
Yeah. And you have to deal with the consequences.
Makes sense. But what if someone was tricked into drinking something much stronger?
Then they realize.
Or they have a health condition that makes them react really badly to alcohol.
Those are important points.
They could change how things are viewed legally
Medical history matters.
and the circumstances of the intoxication.
Any evidence of intent, it all plays a role.
So it's not just a simple yes or no answer,
It depends on the specifics of each case.
which is why lawyers are so important.
Right? Absolutely. They know how to handle these complicated situations.
And make sure justice is done.
That's the goal.
This deep dive is making me realize how much I took the law for granted.
It's more than meets the eye.
I thought it was all about clear rules,
Black and white.
but it's so much more than that
It's constantly adapting.
to our changing world.
And our understanding of ourselves.
It's like a conversation between what's right and what's wrong,
Trying to find a balance.
between protecting people and keeping order.
It's a fascinating process.
And these general exceptions, they show how the law tries to make sense of those gray areas.
Where intent and circumstance.
That consequence all come together.
It's about acknowledging that life isn't always simple.
And the law has to reflect that.
Well said. Okay, time for a quick recap.
We've talked about how the law addresses those situations.
Where actions that might look like offenses.
Could actually be okay.
We've covered everything from following orders to self-defense to accidents.
And the impact of age and mental state.
It's been a lot.
But it's clear that understanding these exceptions isn't about getting away with something
It's about understanding the principles behind the law.
and how they work in real life. It's about looking beyond the surface,
Thinking about intent.
considering the context.
And recognizing that there might be a good reason for someone to break the rules.
It's about acknowledging that life is messy.
And the law has to deal with that messiness.
Well, I don't think I'll ever look at a legal case the same way again.
That's what we like to hear.
I'm going to be looking for those nuances.
And considering all the different perspectives.
It's all about keeping an open mind.
And remembering that there's always more to the story.
Well said to our listeners.
Out there.
Next time you're in a situation where the law seems unclear,
Or you're wondering if there's more going on.
remember what we've talked about today,
Think about the intent.
the circumstances.
And whether there might be a justified exception.
And if you're ever unsure,
Don't hesitate to talk to a lawyer.
they can guide you through those legal twists and turns.
And help you make the best decision.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
We've only scratched the surface of this topic.
But we hope we've sparked your curiosity.
And given you a new way to think about the law.
Remember, knowledge is power.
And understanding the law.
Gives you the power to navigate the world with confidence.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
To get you thinking and questioning.
Until then, keep exploring. And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into the fascinating world of general exceptions in the law. It's been a whirlwind of a journey.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. From those tricky situations where following orders might get you off the hook, to self-defense, accidents, even the age-old question of whether it's ever okay to break the law for the greater good.
It all comes down to context.
Exactly. Things aren't always as black and white as they seem.
It's been really interesting to see how these general exceptions force us to think differently about, well, about what it means to break the rules.
So as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember about these exceptions?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the law isn't always about right and wrong in a simple way.
It's not always about punishment.
It's about fairness. These exceptions, they highlight the need to look deeper, to consider the intent behind actions, and to recognize that sometimes tough choices have to be made.
So it's not about finding loopholes, right? It's about understanding the principles behind the law and how they play out in real-world situations.
You got it.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. I'll never look at a legal case the same way again.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'll be looking for those nuances, considering all sides of the story before jumping to conclusions.
That's the spirit.
So to our listeners out there, the next time you encounter a situation where the law seems a bit murky, maybe you're wondering if there's more to the story.
Yeah.
Remember these principles we've discussed.
Think about intent, the circumstances,
And don't forget the possibility of a justified exception.
And if you're ever in doubt,
Talk to a lawyer.
they can help you navigate those legal waters.
Always solid advice. Well, we've only just scratched the surface of this topic, but hopefully we've sparked your curiosity.
Giving you a new lens to view the law through.
Remember, knowledge is power.
And understanding the law empowers you to navigate life with greater confidence.
Thank you for joining us on this legal adventure. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to get you thinking, questioning, and exploring the world with a fresh perspective. Until then, keep diving deeper.